Hello again, and good evening from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Here it is evening. A recently published study by the Organization for Economic Coordination or Cooperation and Development, OECD, it was published in December 2019, showed that Finland has among the so-called native Finnish students and the students either born outside Finland or born of parents who were born or born to parents who were born outside Finland. There are differences in achievement levels, and for example, in continuing their studies after the currently 9-year grade school, are among the greatest ones in the Organization for Economic Coordination or Cooperation and Development. Finland is roughly tied with Denmark, which in 2001, because its then center-right minority government depended in the Danish parliament on the largely anti-immigration and strongly anti-Muslim and right-wing to far-right and populist Danish People's Party for Support implemented some strict laws, for example, by forbidding the legal marriages of native-born Danes with foreign-born people, or like people having originally a foreign citizenship, until both are at least 24 years old, in order, according to the government's official explanation at the time, to reduce the so-called arranged marriages, which are arranged by the parents of at least one prospective spouse or both, and which are still fairly common in the traditional cultures and families of especially Africa and Asia, less so in Latin America, but becoming gradually less common also in Africa and Asia, granted. Finland, like many other European countries, experienced a huge influx of refugees and would-be refugees in 2015. A total of about 35,000 people moved to Finland that year. But of the 32,000 or so refugees, over 30,000 refugees or would-be refugees who moved to Finland that year, at least 20,000 or more have either voluntarily left or have been forced to leave or have been deported. But let's read this interesting article about the issue from the English language edition of YLE News. YLE, or Yleisradio, literally translated public radio, is the main Finnish public sector broadcasting company. It still appears on the radio waves, on the television screens, and increasingly here on the internet. Since I was a mostly itinerant substitute teacher between 2005 and 2014 in the Helsinki region, the Finnish National Capital Region, I taught or substitute taught many children and teenagers, especially children of immigrant backgrounds, and some of them actually were born outside Finland. I, for example, substituted at least 2 teachers of the so-called preparatory class, elementary school class, with children whose Finnish language knowledge is not sufficient yet for formal studying in the regular Finnish language classrooms. And then I substituted at least for 1, possibly 2 Finnish as a second language teacher or teachers. So I know a bit about what I'm talking about. And their attitudes and behavior, those students, immigrant students and students of immigrant backgrounds, students' attitudes and behavior ranged from very motivated, very good, to rather bad. So the very good ones, they kept trying despite their immigrant backgrounds, and even though their Finnish language was not perfect grammatically, I always appreciate it, like I always do appreciate a good effort on the part of students. But then the badly behaving ones, for example, uh, let it be known to me, either directly or indirectly, that because I was only a substitute teacher, they did neither wanted to respect nor listen to nor obey me. One such student called me an idiot, I think sometime in the spring of 2014, several months before I immigrated here. That was not the main reason, but the main reason was that I was engaged to be married to a Filipino lady. And I judged that since I have an international background, for several years in the late 1980s and early 1990s, I lived in Canada. It would be easier for me to adjust to living here in the Philippines than for her to adjust to living in Finland. And then um, secondly, this same student, a boy of Somali background, claimed that stated that my handwriting was worse than that of the regular Finnish as a second language teacher. And I basically replied, so what? And added that I can speak clearly. Yes, it is true that when I have to hurriedly write, my handwriting is certainly not one of the prettiest ones. And in my last years of substitute teaching in Finland before immigrating here in the autumn of 2014, I did increasingly tell the students that they were right. But I emphasized the need to then listen to me clearly. Okay, let's go to the article in order not to make this video too long. The Finnish language equivalent ran to about 1 hour, 10 minutes. So what is this about? Academics, outdated structures, discrimination behind migrant students' poor performance in Finland. Teaching, student counseling, and secondary education all discriminate against migrant background students, experts say. A review by Jyväskylä University researchers of results from the 2012 and 2015 International Student Assessments PISA, spelled PISA, indicate that a migrant background affects learning outcomes in Finland more than in many other countries. For example, research based on the 2012 results shows that primary school, in other words, elementary school mathematics skills in second generation migrants lag 2 years behind those of ethnic Finns. Ms. Elina Kilpi-Jalonen, assistant sociology professor of Turku University, said that Finland's approach to early education is partly responsible for the phenomenon. She noted that in Finland, only a small proportion of children participate in early years education compared to other Nordic countries, in other words, Sweden and Norway, which border on Finland, and then Denmark and Iceland, which do not border on Finland. In addition, children begin primary school at the age of 7 and school days are short. She said that is not necessarily the best combination when it comes to learning a language. Another problem lies in how Finnish is taught to migrant background children. Schools teach Finnish and Swedish as a second language, designated S2 in the case of Finnish. Aisha, one of 5 migrant background young adults of Somali background, ranging from 18 to 20 years of age, teaching Somali background youngsters at a summer school in eastern Helsinki, the Eastern Center or Itäkeskus district, told Wiley that in senior high school she attended classes or courses for both Finnish as a native language and as a second language. According to Aisha, the teacher was the same, but that was where the similarity ended. She said that the teacher did not always review or grade assignments and tests for students learning Finnish as a second language, and sometimes the teacher was absent. She said there were also marked differences in learning content. For students studying Finnish as their mother tongue, the goal is to develop, and the tests get harder all the time. But for students of Finnish as a second language, we always do the same easy assignments and watch movies. So the difference between students gets larger all the time. Then people wonder why our results are bad, she noted. According to Helsinki University doctoral researcher Ms. Tuuli Kurki, immigrant background children are often stigmatized. I mean, a negative label or negative labels are attached to them by being placed in S2 classes, even when they have been born in Finland. The rationale for placing students in S2 classes can be seen as racialization, she said, referring to the practice of attaching racial or ethnic identities and related prejudices to individuals or groups. The group of 5 young people also noted that schools may shy away from conducting reading tests or from interpreting the results because they are not seen as appropriate for S2 or Finnish as a second language students. Ms. Mira Kalalahti, a doctor of political science at Helsinki University, also agreed that difficulties with the Finnish language can easily be misinterpreted as learning difficulties. Of course, certain students of immigrant or refugee backgrounds or students who themselves have been born into such families abroad have also learning difficulties, but so do also some students of native Finnish background. So learning difficulties certainly do not obey ethnic, racial, religious, linguistic, color, or other lines. Meanwhile, while many children are placed in S2 classes against their will, others who would like to learn Finnish as a second language do not get the opportunity. A report prepared by published by the Finnish Education Evaluation Center in 2015 found that 37% or 3/8 of the Finnish senior high schools at the time and 16% or 1/6 of the Finnish vocational schools at the time did not offer S2 courses. The Finnish language problem is not just about poor teaching. Outright discrimination and racism are also part of the equation, the 5 young people speculated. While they all said they got the support they needed at school, they also recalled unpleasant experiences. Just don't get married at 18 and start having children, one of the volunteer teachers said, recalling the words of a student counselor to her 14-year-old friend. Can't you afford to buy books? One teacher asked one of these young women when she went to her first senior high school lesson without the required textbooks. Advanced mathematics is not for you. You should switch to basic. One math teacher reported told a student whom he or she assumed to be of immigrant background during a lesson. Wow, I didn't expect this from you, another teacher allegedly told a student in reaction to a good test score. 4 of the volunteers said they were kept back after school to redo tests or assignments under the teacher's supervision because they were thought to have cheated or copied answers from the internet. Aisha, one of these 5 young women, said that in primary school or elementary school, she was forced to do the same test 3 times. When the teacher still did not believe the outcome, she was subjected to an oral assessment during a recess or break. Constant discrimination and put-downs naturally affect the student's success at school. When others constantly question your performance, you also begin to doubt yourself, one holiday teacher, Farhia, said. Of course, this concerns students of any ethnic background. Doctoral researcher Kurki said that in theoretical terms, the volunteers' experiences reveal how structural and interpersonal racism can easily lead to internalized racism when people begin to believe the messages they receive from their environment. Student counseling and other teaching has been and continues to be both consciously and unconsciously racialized, she added. I'm not claiming that all teachers are racist, but if no one is racist, why do so many people experience racism? She added. The PISA comparison also contains other revelations about Finland. Among OECD countries, Finland tends to corral immigrants into separate schools more than others. Well, the immigrants, especially those of non-European background, meaning Asian, non-Australian and non-New Zealander Oceanian background, or that would include also Australian Aborigines and Maori, New Zealand's native people, if any of them live in Finland. African background, and of course Latin American background. Well, they tend to congregate especially in the Finnish national capital region, the Helsinki region, and particularly in Helsinki proper. So where do they live? In Helsinki, they live especially in eastern Helsinki, but also there are significant immigrant communities in or near the Helsinki center and in other parts of Helsinki. Less so, according to my limited teaching experience in Helsinki, in Western Helsinki and Northern Helsinki, but not unknown even there. Because the Helsinki region is actually, in international comparison, Finland's only truly metropolitan region. The only urban region in Finland with well over 1 million people when all the surrounding and close to surrounding cities and towns are added to it. So over 1/5 of Finland's population lives in the Helsinki region. And while there are also significant foreign-born minorities and second-generation immigrant and refugee minorities, for example, in the southwest of Finland, in the Turku region, and in western Finland, in the Tampere region, and some also elsewhere, like in the Jyväskylä region of central Finland, perhaps to a limited extent in the Kuopio region of eastern Finland, in the Lappeenranta region of southeastern Finland, in the Joensuu region of eastern Finland, even minor ones in the Kajaani region of northern eastern Finland, and especially as far as northern Finland is concerned, in the Oulu region of northern and northwestern Finland. Especially most immigrants of Latin American, African, and Asian backgrounds and their children tend to live in the Helsinki region or close to it. And even inside the Helsinki region, there are fairly great regional variations. Meanwhile, different studies also suggest that Finland has the largest gap between university education of ethnic Finns and immigrant background students. According to a European Commission report, in 2007, just 27%, or just over 1/4, of immigrant background people had university degrees in Finland, the lowest figure among all of the Nordic countries. Additionally, an OECD education report from 2018 found that first and second generation immigrants were clearly underrepresented among university graduates. In fact, just 2% of 20 to 29-year-old graduates were first or second generation migrants. Overall, this group accounted for only 8% of all university graduates, a situation that is more unequal than in any other country in the analysis. Miss Ulkar Aghayeva, 28, who based on her first and last names probably is from one of the Central Asian countries, either Western or Central Asian countries that used to be Soviet republics in the Cold War era, related her experiences with a doubtful student counselor. When she had completed 8th grade, in other words, she was about 15 or 14 at least, with an average grade of 9 on a scale of 4 to 10 used in the Finnish grading of the grade schools and even senior high schools, 10 being the highest. Her counselor said that she would not get into senior high school. I was told that I should study to become a practical nurse. I actually wanted to study medicine, she added. Miss Aghayeva said that her grade average allowed her to enter a natural sciences senior high school. But that student counselor also said that her dreams of becoming a doctor were useless. She then began to examine other options and took an interest in social issues, especially the European Union. She very excitedly said that she would like to become a member, or would become a member of the European Parliament, which is the European Union's legislature, based in Brussels and Strasbourg. The teacher then said that if I, as a Finn, won't find it easy to become an MEP or member of the European Parliament, then you have no chance, she recalled. Well, very discouraging. The Finnish Teachers Union, OAJ, the teachers' professional organization, opetusalan ammattijärjestö, so the teaching fields professional organization in English, said that it is aware of the tendency toward othering among some school counselors. It is still too easy for us to direct immigrant background students to the vocational side after elementary and junior high schools, OAJ specialist Ms. Päivi Lyhykäinen said. I always try to speak up and ask why we are directing immigrants to become practical nurses, why not nurses or doctors, she added. In some cases, students may not have access to counseling at all. The Finnish school system relies heavily on parental and guardian support. However, not all parents know the Finnish school system or even speak Finnish. And while it is true that among the Finnish teachers, most can communicate at least at a basic or average level in English, some are reluctant to speak English and may actually use those teachers who are more fluent in English as quasi-interpreters. And some, unfortunately, those who are profoundly nationalist and populist may have openly or covertly racist attitudes towards immigrants of certain ethnic backgrounds, especially North African or Western Asian, that is Middle Eastern, especially if they come from Muslim majority countries, but also various other attitudes. For example, Russians and other Eastern Europeans are generally frowned upon in Europe more than fellow Northern Europeans like Estonians, who are closely related to the Finns, Swedes, Norwegians, Danes, Icelanders, and then Central Europeans, meaning mainly Germans, Austrians, and Swiss, or then Western Europeans such as the Dutch, Belgians, French people, Britons or British people, and Irish people. So Eastern Europeans, but also Southern Europeans, such as the Portuguese, Spaniards, Italians, and Greeks are to some extent frowned upon because they are considered like, well, especially Africans, particularly Somalis, and these Eastern Europeans like Russians, Ukrainians, Poles, less reliable as individuals and as students and workers, less diligent, less law-abiding. Some people even claim that they are less clean and more smelly than fellow Northern Europeans, Central Europeans, Western Europeans, and then North Americans, Canadians and Americans, or then Australians and New Zealanders, especially white ones. So there's a kind of pecking order even among the immigrant groups, most of whose members are white. Skin color doesn't explain all racism, even in Finland. Finland doesn't know how to respond to immigrant special needs, for example, in secondary education, Ms. Kilpi Jakonen said. According to a report published by the Finnish Institute for Health and Welfare, THL, in 2018, 9% of ethnic Finns and 37% of immigrant background young people between the ages of 17 and 24 did not go on to secondary education, meaning vocational school, vocational college, or senior high school. The expansion of primary education by 1 year to the age of 18, in other words, that everyone would have to complete 10 grades, not including the possible preschool grade of basic or grade school education, could provide a secondary level education to all primary school graduates, at least on paper. However, Ms. Mira Kalalahti, doctoral researcher, noted that the right to primary education alone will not solve the problem unless schools beef up their support systems, student care systems, which in Finland include usually at least an assistant or vice principal, if not the actual principal, at least one special education teacher, a guidance counselor or the guidance counselor, depending on the school's size. And then if the school can afford to have a school nurse and or a school social worker, kuraattori in Finnish, then also he or she or they belongs or belong to that group. And its purpose is to prepare and then monitor and develop plans to help the students who have challenging life situations, whether at home or among their peers, or because of some diagnosed learning and or concentration and or motivational problems. Even getting a secondary education will not suffice because students need adequate support for their studies. The same THL report found that 5% of Finns dropped out of secondary education, I think meaning senior high school education mostly, compared to 8% of foreign background students. In summary, the OAJ's Lyhykäinen described the Finnish school structures as backward or sort of time lagging, because I also read the Finnish version of this article, more extensive one, I think, because it also was linked to another article, and I read a summary of that one too. Immigrant education has not previously, this has actually combined two separate articles, maybe because of the lack of space and shortage of readers, has not previously been seen as something that should be invested in. We have many municipalities that have not had a single immigrant before 2015, because 2015, as I noted earlier in this video, was the year when a massive number of refugees and would-be refugees came to Finland, like many other European countries, especially from Syria and Iraq. Syria was still badly torn up by its civil war, which now is gradually moving towards its end, but still some rebel groups hold out against President Bashar al-Assad. And then Iraq, which was particularly restless then. And back in 2015, we have to remember that the terrorist organization ISIS was holding large parts of Syria and Iraq, and people were fleeing already because of that reason. However, she noted that there has been a change in recent years. The Finnish government is waking up to the fact that we have people coming from elsewhere who have certain needs. In practice, new teachers should be trained to deal with the new situation, and teachers with different backgrounds need to be recruited, she said. In the education world, we have experienced folk who were trained in the 1980s and 1990s. And still in the 1980s, Finland was a particularly ethnically and racially homogeneous country. Only in the 1990s did Finland started to become an ethnically and racially, culturally, linguistically, and religiously heterogeneous country again. Because there were times in the past where especially ethnically Finland was a more heterogeneous country with significant Swedish, German, and Russian minorities, for example. Finland, of course, does have those old minorities, the native Swedish speakers, roughly 5% of the population. It does have an older Russian community dating back to the 19th century when Finland almost all the time belonged to Russia. And then the Romani or Gypsy minority dating back to the 16th century. And of course, Finland's native people, the Sami people who live mostly in northern Lapland, Lapland being Finland's northernmost province or region. Society has become more diverse since then, she commented, and that of course is true. And even for fully qualified teachers, it's always an asset to update their pedagogical and related abilities, such as intercultural communication skills. Have a blessed and successful and comforting remainder of July.